Amen. All right, we are 2 Samuel chapter 1. Let me tell you about 2 Samuel if you haven't figured it out already. It's got 24 chapters. It's got just under 700 verses. And what I would like to do is just to encourage you this week to read 2 Samuel. If it's been a while since you've done that, or maybe have never done that, and this is entering into a new study for you, whatever the case may be, if you think about this, if you would read just about 100 verses a day, you'll be through it in a week. And that'll give you a basic familiarity with the book and the material that we're going to cover. That's always helpful. And I found that if I can get through the book, and I really like to do this, to get all my study notes made for a book before we enter into it, because it helps to have the overall view of it. I wasn't quite able to get all my study notes done. I have several chapters to go, but enough that I know there are things that are coming up in the early part of the book that have an importance later in the book. Things that are connected to 1 Samuel, that have a connection in 2 Samuel. When you get that panoramic view of the material and you begin reading about things and you know this name's coming up later, this is important for something down the road, it really grabs your attention. So would you make an effort this week, 100 verses a day, you get through the book, and you'll have at least a familiar grasp of the material and may be able to spot some things in these early chapters that are important later. And that will help you out. You'll log those in and it'll make good sense to you. As you read through that, that's what I'm challenging you to do in week 1. And when you get through that material at the end of the week, or maybe you already are, I want you to think about a nutshell statement for the whole book. If you were to give a one-liner for 2 Samuel, what would it be? Maybe if you've read through that material or are familiar with it, what's your one-liner to summarize the book? Does anybody have one? If not, then you'll be busy this week. Read that material and think about a one-line statement. I'd give you mine, but then it would mess you up. You'd be thinking about that all the time instead of forming your own. And forming your own is really a good thing to do. And so I'm going to encourage you to do that. In week 2, after you've read through the material in week 1, in week 2, begin to make a brief outline. I'm talking about in the biggest chunks that you can, just to sort of divide that book up. If you were to go through it and you were to write down just a major point outline, I'm not talking about anything other than Roman numerals. If you're familiar with outlining, your Roman numeral will be your major point, and it will cover a long section. Underneath your Roman numeral, you'll have capital A, capital B, capital C. Under the capital A, B, C, you'll have 1, 2, 3. Under 1, 2, 3, you may have a small A, B, C. I'm just talking about the Roman numeral breakdown. Just the big chunks of the book. You might come up with 4 or 5 sections through the whole 24 chapters. What's going on in these chapters? Then what's the next category that comes up? Week 1, if you'll read it, a one-liner statement. What's the book about? Week 2, come up with a major breakdown, 4 or 5 points of here's what's going on in the book as you progress through it. If you'll do that, you will begin getting set up to have your own personal study notes for the book of 2 Samuel. If you'll do that with every book that we study, that will be a great benefit. Save those, file them away. If you have a computer, your filing space is small. If you're old school, you have a filing cabinet or a drawer and it takes up hard copy space. But if you can do that on a computer electronically, it won't take any space in your home at all, and you'll access that real easy. Just be sure to back it up somewhere so you don't lose it, because those will be your study notes. So that's what we're going to do. And if you have to get some help, if you need to find a cheat to be able to do it, nothing wrong with that. But first try it on your own. If you'll just get a good brotherhood commentary, Gospel Advocate, Truth for Today, something like that. If you get a good brotherhood commentary, usually in the beginning of a commentary, in the opening pages of that, they're going to put an outline. And if you need some help figuring out what that breakdown is, if you'll do that, that'll be good. But first try it on your own before you go to that, because then you won't think. I want you to think through this. This is like, in the old days when we were going to go somewhere we didn't know, we had to get out a paper map and read it. And you had to know your roads. You got a picture in your brain of the map and where you were going. You learned your way around town. Today we use a cheat. We just say, hey, what's her name? And tell her to find me this place. And she draws up a map and tells you turn by turn where to go. And then if you were to try to tell somebody where you went, you wouldn't be able to do it. All you know is that voice telling you left, right. That's all you know. But in the old days, you had to do it personally on a map, and you learned your way around. I want you to get your own map of the Bible books and work your way through that. It'll be good to get that picture in your brain. If you'll do that with the written material and do it with the geography of a book, so that you have a map that pulls up in your brain when you start going through this, and they're at Mahanaim, or it's talking about Regalim, or it's talking about Hebron. When you hear those places mentioned, in your brain will come up this map, and you'll have it as a ready access. But you have to do that old school work to be able to have that. It takes a little time and effort, and I encourage you to do that. It's very much worthwhile. So in this handout, we're covering 2 chapters, chapters 1 and chapter 2. In the first chapter, David is weeping. He's mourning over the death of Saul and Jonathan. So there's a real connection to 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel ends with the death of Saul and his sons on Mount Gilboa in the battle against the Philistines. In 2 Samuel, you open up with David getting a report about that. And the first chapter is David mourning over the death of Saul and Jonathan. Chapter 2, you have this last great tug of war between the house of Saul and the house of David. That's the first 2 chapters, and it'll give you a snapshot of where we're going with that. And I did mention this to a couple of people before class. If you were to look in the arrangement of the Old Testament books in a Hebrew Bible, it would be very different than what we have in our English Bible. How many books of the Old Testament are there? 39. And so we have this little tune of 39, 27, 66 for the books of the Bible. Old Testament, New Testament together is 66. In the Hebrew Old Testament, you have 24 books. And 1 and 2 Samuel were one book. They are that connected. 1 and 2 Kings were one book. The 12 minor prophets, one book. So the Hebrew Old Testament has much fewer books because they're arranged and grouped a little differently, same material. And so you have 1 and 2 Samuel that were originally one piece of material. And you'll notice that as we get into 2 Samuel, there's that kind of connection where one ends, the other one begins. Saul and his sons died. 1 Samuel 31, a report comes to David. 2 Samuel chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. But there's a problem. The death of Saul, as it's reported at the end of 1 Samuel, and the way that the report comes to David in 2 Samuel chapter 1, they don't match up. They're different. How would you answer that? What's the problem there? Have you read ahead to know what I'm talking about? Let's look at 1 Samuel 31, verse 4. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and pierce me through with it. Otherwise these uncircumcised will come and pierce me through and make sport of me." But his armor-bearer would not, for he was greatly afraid. So Saul took his sword and fell on it. Why wouldn't his armor-bearer pierce him through and kill him? Saul's saying, "Look, I'm already wounded. I can't fight anymore. This thing's over. The Philistines are coming. They're going to grab a hold of me while I'm still alive. They're going to make sport of me. So pierce me through and kill me, end my life." And the armor bearer wouldn't do it. Why wouldn't he do it? A pledge to protect him. Why wouldn't David do it? David had multiple opportunities to kill Saul. Why wouldn't he do it?
Saul was his anointed.
Saul was the Lord's anointed. You do not raise your hand against the Lord's anointed. You don't do it. God has anointed him as the king. And until God removes him, he is the king. He's the Lord's anointed. He's on the throne. And you treat him that way. You respect God when you respect his anointing on an individual. And so David wouldn't do it, and the armor bearer wouldn't do it. Now, if you were to go to the parallel in 1 Chronicles chapter 10, verse 4, here is a parallel to this account at the end of 1 Samuel. In 1 Chronicles 10:4, it reads this way. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it. Otherwise these uncircumcised will come and abuse me." But his armor-bearer would not, for he was greatly afraid. Therefore Saul took his sword and fell on it. Basically an identical reading. They pair up real well. Instead of make sport of me, it's abuse me, same thing. Now you come to 2 Samuel chapter 1. Verses 5 through 10. So David said to the young man who told him, there's a young man who comes to David, coming from the battle, Saul against the Philistines, and he's coming with a report about how that went. And David said to the young man who told him, "How do you know that Saul and his son Jonathan are dead?" The young man who told him said, "By chance, I happened to be on Mount Gilboa, and behold, Saul was leaning on his spear, and behold, the chariots and the horsemen pursued him closely. When he looked behind him, he saw me and called to me, and I said, 'Here I am.' And he said to me, 'Who are you?' And I answered him, 'I am an Amalekite.' Then he said to me, 'Please stand beside me and kill me. For agony has seized me because my life still lingers in me.' So I stood beside him and killed him because I knew that he could not live after he had fallen. And I took the crown which was on his head and the bracelet which was on his arm, and I brought them here to my Lord." That just doesn't match up. I suppose somebody could suppose that Saul fell on his own spear, on his own sword, and this Amalekite comes along and sees him hung up on it. And he's still not dead. That's not the way the end of 1 Samuel reads. Saul ended his own life. And when his armor bearer saw that he ended his life, he killed himself also. This guy coming to David's telling a lie. He's telling an absolute lie. And the question is, why? Why did he lie? What would be the purpose? What would be the motive of that? I'm really asking you. Think out loud with me. Maybe some type of reward coming, maybe, okay?
I think he thought David would be pleased because everyone knew about the battle
right? If Saul is the nemesis of David, and I show up and I tell him, I took your nemesis out of the way, I ended his life, and I brought what rightly belongs to you as the new king. I brought the bracelet, I brought the crown. Here it is, now it belongs to you. Look how I've helped you. And he's going to ingratiate himself with David on the throne, and he's really going to be favored and maybe get some kind of reward, some kind of blessing for that. So he's trying to pave his way into the good graces of David by doing that. And so that's an idea that's there. Now, there's something else going on. Yes, Ron? He what? Why is it important that he was an Amalekite? Ron notices he was an Amalekite. All right, Amalekites are enemies. Who did David, when he came back to Ziklag with his 600 men, what did they find in Ziklag? Last week, what did they find there? The place is burned with fire. Their wives and their sons and their daughters and all their stuff is gone. Who did it? Amalekites. Who did David and his men just get done pursuing? Amalekites. Who did they just slay and only 400 escaped? Amalekites. Who's this guy? An Amalekite. What's he doing up at Mount Gilboa? If you went from Ziklag, David, here's 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 1. Now it came about after the death of Saul, when David had returned from the slaughter of the Amalekites, that David remained 2 days in Ziklag. Ziklag to Mount Gilboa, where Saul died, you're looking 85 to 100 miles to the north. Amalekites were known for the south country. What's he doing up at Mount Gilboa? Well, evidently they were around in the land here and there, and maybe some of them proselyted over to live among the Hebrew people. But this guy shows up down at Ziklag. And the battle's over, and David has rescued the people. They've come back to Ziklag. On the third day after being back at Ziklag, this guy shows up. Is it conceivable that he left the battle up there by Mount Gilboa, traveled 85 to 100 miles over that terrain, and the way he had to take would be longer than that? Is it conceivable that he could have got to Ziklag in that amount of time from up there? Yeah, it's possible. It's possible. But he's an Amalekite. And David and his men hate Amalekites. And so what better way to find David's favor than to say, here's the crown. And I'm the one who ended this guy's life who was out to get you all these years. And so here you go. So you have to read between the lines and suppose a few things. Do we know that for sure? No. Do we know he was lying? Yes. We do know he was lying because we're given a report not only in 1 Samuel 31 but also 1 Chronicles 10 that are very different. And this guy has a story and he's telling it, and it's some kind of personal advantage that he's after. So David's home at Ziklag. Third day this guy shows up. And I want you to notice how this report turns out. Go down to 2 Samuel chapter 1, verses 13 through 16. David said to the young man who told him, "Where are you from?" And he answered, "I am the son of an alien, an Amalekite." Then David said to him, "How is it that you are not afraid to stretch out your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" And David called one of the young men and said, "Go cut him down." And he struck him and he died. David said to him, "Your blood is on your head, for your mouth has testified against you, saying, I've killed the Lord's anointed." Well, that's not exactly what he said. He said, "I killed Saul. I killed him." And David said, Why Why weren't you afraid? Saul's armor bearer wouldn't do it. He was afraid. Why weren't you afraid to strike down the Lord's anointed? Your own mouth has testified that you did it. Go cut him down. And they did it. Can you imagine the look on that guy's face? He didn't know Hebrew law. He didn't know law of Moses. He didn't understand the mindset of God's people. He didn't know what the Scriptures taught about the Lord's anointed. He didn't get any of that. If he was around the Hebrew people, he wasn't around them very long. This is one reason I think he was not one who was accustomed to being with the... Why would he be in the battlefield of all places? It's like he's part of Israel. He's wanting to pretend he's part of Israel. He's on their side and he's with them in the battle. You're not going to be strolling around through the countryside in the biggest battlefield in the Old Testament pages at Jezreel and see this massive battle between the Philistines and the Israelites, and just happen to go up to the camp of the king on Mount Gilboa and just happen to be strolling by, just happen to be in the neighborhood. If you're an alien coming through traveling, you're going far away from that. He's trying to pretend he's with Israel, but he doesn't know a thing about them. And he tells this lie. And boy, did it backfire on him. Thinking he was going to get out of something, he actually admitted something he didn't want to. And it really backfired on him. These Amalekites, back in, 1 Samuel 15, King Saul was sent to wipe out Agag, their king, and utterly destroy them. Now, what we're finding out, and then David pursued them, and 400 escaped. Is he one of the ones who escaped? We don't know. Evidently, there are pockets of these people in several places. Saul battled some. David battled others. They're here and they're there. And here's this one, and he thinks he's got an in with the new king. And he tells this lie. So I think there's at least... if you're going to look for a lesson, do we learn something about deceit? Do we learn something about telling lies? And how it backfires on us? Isn't there a kid saying about lies? Isn't there a children saying? What a tangled web we weave if at first we practice to deceive. It's something similar to, it's like that. And we teach that to our children because you tell a lie. And I've referenced Judge Judy many times. She was sharp in her courtroom. And she would ask people things, and she would tell them, it's not hard when you tell the truth. But it's hard to remember when you tell lies. And to be consistent with that lie all the way through. So she would let them talk and give them enough rope. They'd hang themselves if they were telling a lie. It's easy when you're telling the truth. But if you're telling a lie, it's hard to remember all your lies and to make them gel together. So he tells this, and we learn something about deceit and lying, and it will backfire on us. And it's hard to remember the lies that we tell and be consistent with that. And this guy, this Amalekite, he didn't understand the Scriptures. He didn't understand that. And I've mentioned this before. I've run into people, and they find out I'm a preacher, and right away they want to start talking religion because they think it's going to impress me. I'm talking about like a salesman. We had a vacuum guy at our house sitting in our living room. And Mr. Schnell, what do you do? I'm a preacher. Oh, where are you? Church of Christ in Owasso. Oh. And then he starts telling me all this religious stuff he knows. And he didn't know beans. And so what it does, by him doing that. Okay, I like religion. I'm a Bible guy. He's going to talk Bible with me. He's going to be in my good graces. I'm going to buy stuff from him. Instead, when I listened to him talk and he didn't know anything about Bible that he thought he knew, it makes me suspicious of him rather than trust him. And that's what happened with this Amalekite, and David has him killed for the lie that he tells. Telling the truth can open good doors. Acts chapter 8. Philip is in the road, and he runs up to a chariot, and he meets a guy. And the guy's reading a section of Isaiah 53. And Philip asked him, do you understand? Do you understand what you're reading? And the guy said, oh yeah, this is easy stuff. I know all. Let me tell you all about it. He didn't do that. He said, how can I unless someone tells me? Unless someone explains it. And he invited him to come into the chariot with him, and he preached Jesus to him, and he helped the man to save his soul. When you tell the truth, it opens doors of good things. You think about Acts chapter 19. Paul comes to the city of Ephesus, and there's about 12 guys there. And he says to them, did you receive the Holy Spirit when you believed? And they said, we don't know anything about the Holy Spirit. And Paul realized something was wrong. And he begins to teach them about Christ. And he baptizes them for the remission of their sins. When we tell the truth, it opens doors of possibility for good things. When we tell lies, we're pretending to be something we're not, and it closes doors. And if we're telling a lie to someone who knows better, it makes them very suspicious of us. We do a lot of evil that way, and we get ourselves in a lot of trouble. Chapter 1, I want you to realize what just happened. We're finishing chapter 1. I'm skimming through this chapter. I'm expecting you're going to read the verses in between. We're skimming through the chapter this morning and just getting the basic idea of what's there. As chapter 1 closes, David is in lament. He's mourning for Saul and for his son Jonathan. This is from verse 17 through verse 27. A large section of this chapter. Verses 17 and 18. Then David chanted with this lament. When he chanted, what is that? What is it when you chant? What is that? You're singing. This is a song. It's different than, it doesn't have, soprano, tenor, bass, alto. It's not that. This is a chant. It's going to be more monotone, and it's not going to have multiple parts. It's a chant. Maybe you heard like a Gregorian chant or something like that. It's a chant. And we have some songs in our book that are more like a chant. Every once in a while you run across one. We seldom sing them, but they're there. And so he begins this chant with this lament over Saul and Jonathan, his son. And he told them to teach the sons of Judah the song of the bow. What's it called? The song of the bow. This is the chant that David, verse 17 through 27, and he intends this to be taught to the sons of Judah. Teach them the song of the bow. Behold, it is written in the book of Jasher. I was talking to Curtis before. We were talking about this. What's the book of Jasher? What book of the Bible would you turn to find it? Well, Paul said Psalms. That's as close as you'll get to the idea. That's as close as you'll get to it. Jasher, we don't have the book in particular. We don't have it. You don't find one named Jasher. But if you look up the word, if you look up the idea, it's the idea of like a national hymn book, which Psalms will be about as close as you get to that. And if they're the same thing, I don't know. I don't know if they would, but Psalms has never been called Jasher. But it would be something like that, a national hymn book where you are praising the heroes and the victories and remembering those things. And so David writes out this song of the bow, and it's about Jonathan, and it's about Saul. And if you read from verse 17 on down through there, you read somewhat like you have a theme about how the mighty have fallen. Verse 19, your beauty, O Israel, is slain on your high places. How have the mighty fallen? Verse 25, how have the mighty fallen in the midst of the battle? Jonathan is slain on your high places. Verse 27, how have the mighty fallen and the weapons of war perished? There's your theme about how the mighty have fallen. It's the song of the bow. It's about the battle on Mount Gilboa, about the life of Saul and Jonathan, and about all the good things that they've done. And you begin to read through that, and he's agonizing over the rejoicing of the Philistines. As you start this out, verse 20, tell it not in Gath, proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon, or the daughters of the Philistines will rejoice, the daughters of the uncircumcised will exult. So David is agonizing that the Philistines are rejoicing as though they have had a victory over God Himself. And then he's praising Jonathan and his father Saul. And one of the things you notice as you read down through this song of the bow, as you read this, he doesn't have one negative thing to say about Saul. This is a eulogy. He's mourning, he's lamenting. And it's a eulogy, good things about the life of Saul. He chooses to remember the good. He doesn't bring up the bad. He doesn't bring up the sins or the things he was doing to him personally. He doesn't bring up any of that. He just raises up all the good memories, all the good things that Saul has done. And that's what he highlights those things. Yep. Yeah, Glenda brings up that this is something that we need to learn, we're taught, is that you hate the sin, not the sinner. And to remember that. And David was remembering that. He was bringing up all the good things about Saul. Did he make mistakes? Yeah. Do we? Sure. But let's remember the good. And let's make that the highlight. And that's the song of the bow. And so you read through that, you think about it that way, and he says, you know, this is all in the book of Jasher. It's written down in this sort of national hymn book. And it's a song, a chant to be taught to the sons of Judah, to remember. We remember things when we sing it. How'd you learn the books of the New Testament? You sing them. That's the first way you remember them. It's the easiest way. When we sing things, we remember it. I like a lot of the old songs. One, because that's how I grew up. So they're comfortable to me. But I also like them for this reason. They tend to tell a story. They tend to tell a Bible narrative, a Bible story. And you read through verse 1, verse 2, verse 3, verse 4. You read through those verses and they're telling you something. There's a Bible account there. There's a Bible teaching in it. And I like a lot of the old songs because they do that. A lot of the new songs, the praise songs, the Hallel songs that are so popular today, they lean more on emotion. They usually have a line that is repeated over and over and over and over, but they don't have the narrative. They don't have the teaching that the old songs did. They tend more toward the emotion that's there. And so you find a lot of people today, growing up today, they're being brought up on these new style songs that are usually one line that's repeated over and over and over again, and it tends to have a lot of emotion in it. Is there anything wrong with that? No, there's not. There's not anything wrong with that. But there's also nothing wrong with the old style songs. that would tell you that story, and I would actually get more out of that story. Something else I found with the new songs, and it's really hard for me, not just because they're new to me, but because they're written different with different style notes. And they're harder to harmonize with. They're harder to sing that way, the way that we sing in four-part harmony. The old songs, you'll notice they're easier to sing harmony with. The newer songs have different keys and notes and meshing together of harmony. And unless you know music, unless you can read music, it's really hard. Now, if you're in a university setting and you're in a choir setting and you're being taught to read music and that's the environment you're in, you can do that. But a lot of these new songs are hard for some older ones like me because I don't read music. And a lot of those notes are real unfamiliar to me and how those harmonies are supposed to sound. I can't get it in my brain. And so it's tough. And then they tend to be those one lines that are the one line that's over and over and over again. Older ones were easier for me to harmonize with, not knowing how to read music. I could pick up on it easier. And they had that story of the Bible in them that taught you something. And we are to teach and admonish when we sing. And so I like those older songs. Nothing wrong with the newer songs. And so we need, one tends more toward the emotion than the other, I think. That's my opinion of it, for whatever that's worth. But David has this song of the bow, verse 17 down through the end of the chapter, and look at the things that are taught in it. It's a chant. And I want you to teach it to the sons of Judah. I want them to remember this. It'll be in the book of Jasher. And there it is. So we're learning again about how to deal with those who cause harm to us. And again, your text in the New Testament I point you to is Romans chapter 12, verses 14 through 21. You don't take vengeance for yourself. You leave that to God. And you treat your enemy, you bless them instead of curse them. You give them water when they're thirsty, food when they're hungry, and you do kindness to them. And you overcome evil with that good, and you might win their souls. That's your New Testament text for it. So we learn about how to treat those who cause us harm. Look at this song about Saul and Jonathan and spend some time reading that. Next week we will begin chapter 2 and we'll see if we get close to the end of this handout. But bring it back with you next week and we'll go from there. Any final comments? You have 2 minutes before that bell rings. Yep.
The Pharisees raised their hand against the anointed of the Lord.
Yeah. So Kevin brings up, that's what the scribes and the Pharisees and Sadducees were doing, and the Herodians. They were raising their hand against the Lord's anointed, Jesus. And yet Jesus, we were covering this in Matthew 12 on Wednesday night. You blaspheme the Son of Man, that can be forgiven you. But not against the Holy Spirit. And we were covering that text in our Wednesday night class just last week. So that's an interesting thought and comparison there from Old Testament to New. Anything else? Now you have 1 minute. All right, let it be recorded in the book of Jasher. I let you out early. We're dismissed.